And we're live.
This is Plant Daddy Podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening. Today, we are going to talk about indestructible houseplants, which is kind of like the holy grail of internet plant content that's generated by basically every internet publication, from magazines and lifestyle guides to Instagram and Pinterest tastemakers. And I'm sure they're all familiar with seeing these lists and infographics about plants that are just impossible to kill, even for growers with black thumbs, and about plants that thrive in even the darkest corners or survive without ever getting watered.
Yeah, so often I look at these as clickbait, right?
Because
there's tons of clickbait. Yeah, I think they mostly are. But yeah, we are going to do the dirty work for you. Or, Matthew is at least.
I spent quite some time sitting down in an extremely scientific way to assess this for you. So we'll get back to that in a moment, because we both have a lot of snarky, snide things to share. And we also have our own experiences with plants that we would call indestructible, basically like not requiring any amount of care. And you might actually be kind of surprised by some of our findings. So stay tuned for that. So Steven, how is your week going?
It's going pretty well here. Great summer week again. I guess we had a couple cold days. I have moved a bunch of succulents outdoors. So then they had some rainy days, which in Seattle is a little weird. Messed up their watering schedule. Boohoo, plant daddy kind of problem. But
yeah, it should be smoke season now.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, based on the last few years, this is when our summer just turns over to smoke.
Yeah, knock on wood. Hope that doesn't start. But yeah, doing well. How are you, Matthew?
I'm good. I took a day off today, Monday, because Brian and I went to Yakima to visit his family. It was his nephew's 9th birthday. So now that I'm back over on the other side of the mountains in Seattle, I enjoy having the rest of my day free.
Very cool.
Yeah. So before we dive into our topic, I just want to remind everybody that we can be found on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest at Plant Daddy Podcast, and online at plantdaddypodcast.com. You'll find some various write-ups to accompany some of our episodes on there. And we also want to let you know that you can contact us by email at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com. Please make sure to rate and subscribe so that others can find us and we start appearing higher in searches and lists and all that. And yeah, if you enjoy our first few episodes, please tell a friend.
Yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please send to our email too. Maybe we'll read them.
We probably will, because we don't get much mail, but we read all of what we do get so far.
And you may hear it weeks later.
So that's how we roll. So I have a controversial plant that I want to bring to your attention before we start talking about indestructible houseplants.
Okay.
Have you heard of the pink princess philodendron?
Okay, I have seen this around. I don't know much about it at all.
So this is a variegated philodendron. I don't know what species it is, but it's one of the upright, bushier ones. It doesn't grow quite like a scrambling, draping vine. It has leaves, though, that have really dark striations and variegations between burgundy and kind of reddish colors and pinks and some really dark greens. So it's variegated so that each leaf is consistently irregular with variation. And it's really popular, but it's slow to grow. It's slow to propagate. And they're not the easiest philodendron. I think they probably like higher humidity. So there's really low supply for these. And so the prices are really high, and they're really popular and trending on social media. So another philodendron was introduced into the market shortly thereafter, called Pink Congo instead of Pink Princess. And it was basically thrown out as an alternative to the Pink Princess philodendron at a lower price point. And this one was different because Steven is already shaking his
lower
head.
price point like what? You're probably going to get to that. I'm
40
wondering.
instead of 80 for a 4-inch pot or something.
Lord.
But this one has two-toned leaves. Instead of them being variegated, a whole leaf is the same color, but the new growth is like bubblegum pink. It looks like it was made by Princess Bubblegum in Adventure Time. The bottom leaves are dark green, so you basically have like this dark green, almost like purplish leaf with these pink ones up on top. And as it grows new foliage, those are pink, and then as they mature, they green. But do you have any idea why this is controversial in the horticulture world?
I don't know. Okay, so I'm gonna make guesses. When I hear variegation, I kind of hear like, oh, maybe there's some, virus that causes X, right? Or maybe certain of these colors, they only happen at certain ages in a plant, right? Am I on the right track at all or not?
You're kind of on the right track. So the pink princess philodendron, that one is just variegated. That's just what that plant is. It's going to be a pretty stable mutation that you're going to see throughout a whole plant. Sometimes when you get a variegated cutting of something, when you start to grow it, it doesn't always stay. They sometimes will revert back to their regular state.
Yeah.
But what they did with the pink Congo was they just took some regular ass plant and they treated it with these like chemicals and treatments in a botanical setting to turn the new foliage pink.
So this is like the cosmic cactus of, pink philodendrons.
But it basically like just fades back to, I assume, like pale green new foliage over time. So I don't know how many months it takes for the pink foliage to stop growing out and like be replaced by the new color. But now there's like this big outcry because there's this camp of like, you are trying to devalue a plant that people really want by producing counterfeit knockoffs that customers don't know what they're buying, and then they get this plant that's not worth $48.
I love that. Yeah, I love that in this like fad-driven sort of like new variegated kind of plant, there are already purists who are angry.
Yeah,
what?
like because
who are you? What?
It's sort of like people who freak out about the fact that they will sell blue Phalaenopsis orchids. Like, no, there is no like true actual blue Phalaenopsis. They just use a dye. And so people buy them and they're like, oh, I'm so excited for it to rebloom. And if they ever get it to do, they're just white because that plant only produces white flowers. It's just when you dye them blue,
this
are they blue?
just happened to my mom.
Oh, did
But
it?
hers rebloomed, and there was something orange, actually, like an orange speckled Phalaenopsis.
Oh,
so it was actually appealing, but it was like, okay, that's the kind of the opposite color from blue.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, she got lucky.
Yeah. Well, so basically people think that the pink princess and the pink Congo is just like this huge controversy right now. I personally think that the pink Congo is a nicer looking plant because I don't like the variegation on pink princess.
Okay.
But I also don't want a plant that looks like it's made out of bubble gum.
Team Pink Congo. Yeah, I'm not really the core audience for this kind of plant, as Matthew knows, but I looked at it and I was kind of like, all right, it sort of looks like sunburn color, like uncomfortable sunburn.
Jackson
It looks like
Pollock graffiti.
or like piglet or something. Like it's it's not like a pink that I think I would want a lot of.
It's like Princess Bubblegum pink.
Yeah, but maybe for a collector, and I mean for Instagram, I'm sure it will go.
I'd really like to see what they look like after that chemical gets out of their system and they're just back to what they normally look like.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're anything special. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to answer no.
Okay. All right. Well, so...
Anywho.
Yeah. Let's talk about indestructible plants, because this one, I don't think is... it didn't appear in any of my lists, the pink princess.
It can't even maintain its own color when cared for correctly.
Yeah. So we're not even going to go there. Okay. But as we mentioned before, many online sources provide like these extensive lists of easy care, low maintenance, neglect tolerant, difficult, or impossible to kill houseplants, and it's all aimed at giving a new gardener a starting point when it comes to selecting their first houseplants. And it can be overwhelming when you walk into a garden store because you just see this huge, vast selection, and the aesthetic is like jungle to desert.
Yeah.
And so how do you choose when you're a new plant daddy or just a plant person?
So we have lists online, right? I'm trying to think. When I started this, I don't know that I looked at any of these things. Maybe I would look at Pinterest and sort of see what people had in their homes, right?
Yeah.
I would see what's cheap.
Yeah.
But
and like a lot of these sources, like Better Homes and Gardens and Good Housekeeping, Real Simple, like plant blogs and like home decorating publications. We have kind of always laughed at how a lot of these lists seem like incomplete, imprecise. Sometimes they'll even be inaccurate, or like give you like kind of misguided information, and they're usually poorly researched.
Yeah.
So because we've been frustrated with this ourselves, I wanted to kind of quantify this, since we haven't sat down and like methodologically evaluated the lists. So I did that. And what I did was I put together a spreadsheet, and I took data from 10 different sources. I found these on Pinterest when I searched for indestructible houseplants. So each row in my spreadsheet was a new plant that was mentioned in a different list, and each column contained just a little summary of the care instructions from that source. And each row then was its own source that I found of the 10. So I had 77 plants total that were touted as being really great, low maintenance, hardy as fuck plants, and they would be great choices for any new home gardener when they're kind of considering their first plants. So do you have any guesses about the plants that I found?
First, I'm very surprised that it's that many, honestly.
Yeah.
Almost 80 plants were recommended. I just feel like it would, when I look at these lists, I think, someone is aggregating someone else's list, right? Or they're going to be like, oh, let me double check and see what other people are saying.
Yeah.
Right? Let me just make sure that this is on my list or not or something. So that seems pretty diverse so far. As far as what I'm going to agree with, I mean, gosh, I bet what it will be is like a lot of, hey, whoa, what is that doing on that list? But then I'll kind of think about it and I'll be like, well, yeah, I guess. Or, oh, yeah, I guess if you think about like the Midwestern windowsill and the one in Georgia, and like maybe I'll get there, but maybe not. So
you're kind of thinking like universal appeal for things that you would be surprised if somebody had considered.
Universal appeal for it.
Yeah, like if a plant is going to perform well in a lot of places, like from the Midwest to the South.
Yeah.
And it also has to be something that seems a little bit more special.
Yeah, like I will think in my situation, I'm going to be like, oh, you know what? No, in the Northwest, I feel like I don't see it that much. Or there are these other alternatives that are kind of easier here or prettier and easy here. But then I'll think about it, right? And I'll be like, oh, well, that's not true everywhere. So if you think more broadly, where these lists are probably often just targeting like the English-speaking world, right?
Yeah, and
so
probably
they'd be
like
super,
just the ones in like the United
broad.
States.
Yeah.
So I was actually kind of surprised to find that we have kind of been a bit harsh on this kind of list, because I kind of ranked these by the frequency of how many times they would appear in the lists as well. So the top 10 plants, when ranked by the number of times that they were listed, include snake plant, India rubber plant, peace lily, ZZ plant, English ivy, Chinese evergreen, aloe, spider plant, jade plant, and pothos. So I know that's just like a list of plants, but that gives us an idea of the ones that are appearing the most often as recommendations. And the ones that were listed more than 3 times included fiddle-leaf fig, ponytail palm, Dieffenbachia, Dracaena, peperomia, philodendron, and specifically the heart-leafed philodendron. So among these plants, were there any surprises there for you?
For me, no. I look at some of these, I think they're just kind of unappealing, right? So maybe I'm surprised. I'm like, okay, English ivy? Like, would you want a pot of that somewhere?
You and I are on the same, yeah.
But at the same time, I remember when I was a kid seeing ivy on my aunt's home. She had this red brick home with ivy in Michigan, which just doesn't have a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really striking, but I was also, 6 or something.
Yeah, but it was also outdoors on the outside of a house.
Yeah, that's true. These are as houseplants, you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, listeners, you will learn later this episode that Stephen and I really don't think that ivy is a plant for indoors.
No.
We have strong feelings about this. But we'll save those for later. But basically, I found this list to be a great assortment of plants that you're going to find at Home Depot. Like, that's basic.
Like in a good way, you're saying.
Yeah, like these are the best plants to buy at Home Depot, so they're all going to be pretty easy to find. So I went back through the list that I compiled, and I did a couple of things. First, I compared the care instructions for each plant from each source to determine how consistent or accurate the care details were, and I rated the validity of the information supplied. I rated whether or not I felt like the plant deserved to be included in the list of indestructible or at least hardy indoor plants, and then I compared them against a source that I knew and trusted. So I added a column with the ratings that were assigned to an applicable plant from one of my favorite online blogs, which is called Plants Are the Strangest People. And this blog is really cool. The site is written by a horticulturist, and I think he's also a gay plant daddy, but I'm not sure. And he loves tropical houseplants. He breeds his own anthurium hybrids and writes entries on plants that he writes. And these use his own experience to inform a formal ranking of a plant on a scale of 0 to 10. And the higher the number, the more challenging the plant. So, for instance, he references the lowest rated plants in terms of challenge are silk and plastic plants, which, haha, we get it, that's funny. He was basically just saying, like, there are no plants that you cannot, like, put some effort into and have them thrive. But the easiest that he rated for real are the Mother of Thousands, which actually Miles recently said was a Kalanchoe, but it's actually, I looked this up specifically, and it is part of the related genus Bryophyllum. So it's Bryophyllum diagromontiana.
Really? But
yeah.
I bet Mother of Thousands is probably like a general name,
you're
right?
definitely going to find it under Kalanchoe as well. Like, it's one of those plants that just gets put in different genuses all the time. It's so hard to keep track of.
Okay.
But anyway, his next two easiest were a plant called Chlorophytum, which is a relative of the spider plant, and also the heart-leafed philodendron. And so the heart-leaf philodendron also appeared, it appeared at least 3 times in my list of the easy plants
and
above.
just so I know, like, that... Wait, Hartley Philodendron.
That is...
which one is that?
It goes by a few names. It is Philodendron scadens, or heterodactyphola, or I'm trying to think what the other names are. But it's small heart-shaped leaves. Mm-hmm. There's a variety of it called Brazil that is mottled with like yellow chartreuse and lime green. Yeah, that's a really easy philodendron. But the reason that I went through with the Plants Are the Strangest People rating was because I have grown a lot of plants and used him as a reference, so I kind of know how his scale works. So the hardest plants that he rated were Rex begonias, gardenias, and poinsettias. Those are the hardest plants according to him.
Wow.
Yeah, like the most challenging to grow indoors.
Okay.
So I added his ratings for the plants that were in R77 just to get a range for how it compared with his information. That's kind of how I validated our assessment. So informed with all of this data, I then added my final column, which was my definitive rank of whether or not I could recommend a plant to be like a great choice for a beginning houseplant enthusiast. So of the top 17 plants that were listed between 3 and 8 times across the 10 sources, 15 of these plants were ones that I would recommend without any reservation. Of the remaining ones, the fiddly fig I would recommend with reservations, considering that it needs more consistency in its care than the others. But there were also a couple plants that I would not recommend, including English ivy, which we'll talk more about. But that was recommended in 5 out of the 10 lists. So, of note, of the 77 plants that were there were 7 of them that I just would not recommend. Starting with English ivy, it also includes Boston fern, the florist Kalanchoe. They're really beautiful, colorful. You'll see them at Safeway all the time. Aracia palm, which are really common at garden stores. The Rex begonia, and the general category of ferns and hens and chicks, which are like garden plants. They belong outdoors in your garden. So discarding the 12 plants that I also didn't have any personal experience with and didn't really want to talk on, and I didn't want to specifically condemn or endorse them, among the majority of the plants that were discussed, 58 of them were ones that I do recommend, and 22 were ones that I would recommend with reservation. So I feel like the list's pretty well supported the kinds of things that you want a new gardener to have in like their plant routine. Like they're pretty consistent.
Okay, so that you said 15 out of all of them, right? So that's like about 20% of this list you would recommend.
Yeah, well,
And then all the others are sort of varying degrees. I feel like that's kind of interesting. That's not
yeah,
as high as I thought.
and a lot of these I almost treated as outliers because when I say that of the 17 plants that were listed at least 3 times, I kind of used if you were listed only 2 or fewer times as like discarded data,
Oh,
and then everything that had been mentioned at least 3 times I used as more like statistically
that's
significant.
interesting.
So
Okay.
15 of those 17 I thought were great choices.
So really, ferns are recommended that often. I'm kind of surprised.
Well, so
Surprised Rex begonia as well.
yeah. Now, that's kind of something that I wanted to touch on. So the ones that I just cut out entirely are ones that are fairly intolerant of being neglected or that they're really susceptible to pests or disease.
Yeah.
Those were the qualities that I thought made plants really easy. But let's get back to that in a minute because I definitely
Yeah.
want to discuss why I did not want those plants to be
Okay.
recommended.
So I think something that comes up here, right? And, I feel like I've heard this throughout my, plant experience. Benign neglect, right? They're like, okay,
But what
when in
does that
doubt,
mean?
yeah, when in doubt, don't water it. So yeah, what does neglect mean to you, Matthew?
So I think that this is a term.
Or we're saying tolerant of neglect.
Yeah.
Right, we'll see that.
I think that there are some plants that is true if you have them outdoors and nature is going to care for them a bit. I think that like if you have planted some tree in your garden that's tolerant of neglect, that just means you don't have to water or fertilize it. For an indoor plant, I think that means that you need to put it somewhere where it gets the amount of light that it's going to need. And it doesn't really mind if the humidity is like a non-factor. It's not going to care if you're infrequent with the watering. Like it needs to be able to perk back up if it completely like wilts and flops down and you're like, oh no, I need to
Yeah.
save my plant, and then you water it and it springs back. That's tolerant of neglect. If it's
Yeah.
a plant that continues to look fine, like a sansevieria or a cactus, and you water it occasionally and it tolerates that and just continues to live, and as long as it's growing, that to me is tolerant of neglect. If a plant
And yeah,
can't survive like low humidity or infrequent watering or really forgetful watering, it's not hardy.
yeah, I would agree with that. I think in my experience, tolerant of neglect is like you're saying, like snake plant. Like I don't even notice a difference. Okay, there's no wilting even. Like I mean, barely perceptible.
Yeah.
And I even have one of these kind of fleshy sansevierias.
It looks like a pencil sticking out of a
Yeah,
pot.
basically. So there's no change. That is tolerant of neglect to me. Also, to me, you're like, what you said, this kind of like drooping and then just perking back up. So my Dracaena will do that.
Yeah.
So it will kind of look droopy, and I'm like, oh man, that thing's thirsty. And then if I just water it the next couple days after that, it perks right back up. Maybe I'll lose a leaf or two, and then I'll have like 5 new ones.
Yeah.
So I think that is.
And this is like nice that the plant is expressive
Yeah.
like that. Expressive plants that are resilient are fantastic because they
Yeah.
tell you when they want to be watered.
And really, when I was new, that was hard to trust, honestly, right? Because I'm like, oh no, this thing's dead. I mean, like, what does that? What
Yeah.
will slump over? I mean, like, a foot, right?
Yeah.
Like, kind of, I'm sort of a tall Dracaena now, and it will perk back up. Like, that's great. And I almost think that you kind of have to experience this in your own plants to sort of trust it or know it.
We're actually going to
But-
talk a little bit more about this when we talk more about like how to care for indestructible houseplants.
Yeah.
That's going to be our follow-up to this episode. And there's like a lot of great stuff that we have to say about this because one of my biggest tips, like a friend of mine who just dropped all the social media, he was asking how I like regulate my watering routine. And I just told him that I group plants by how often they need to be watered, which doesn't mean like that each pot in an area likes to be kept the same level moist. It's like there's a small pot that'll dry quickly because the plant likes that next to a large plant that likes to stay wet because by the time I water the small one, that one's not dry. So like thinking strategically, but also by adding expressive plants like that, in among those groups so that like, oh, when my peace lily is like flopped over in the pot like it's dead, then I know to water that area, and then the
Yeah.
peace lily springs back and everything else is watered nicely.
Yeah, and I say, where I would draw the line for that, like tolerant of neglect, for me, it's like, do I lose part of this plant if I neglect it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, does half of it? I'm like, oh, well, this rhizome survived, but you lost the whole plant. Like, that's not tolerant to me. I feel like some
Yeah.
people might say that. They might be like, oh, it's not going to die.
It'll
Like,
just
that's
go
not.
dormant.
So, so I guess my point there is like, there is a little bit of personal preference, right? Kind
Yeah.
of built into like tolerant of neglect. And I would say too, like, sometimes you will get plants that if you neglect them, you will see a little bit of improvement, right? Like you can learn something
Yeah.
about your own routine that maybe you were doing wrong, or maybe it just needs a little seasonality of some sort in there
Yeah.
that you weren't aware of, or
And you might
etc.
also need to kind of learn like what can you neglect? Can
Yeah.
you just water it faithfully, but like don't repot it, don't fertilize it. Like, some plants just want you to do like one thing consistently and then just ignore them. And I find that I come back to a plant after I've just started doing that and checking in regularly. Then I come back and I'm like, oh wow, you have flowers.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
for us proceeding through this episode, we are like, tolerant of neglect means it'll droop. You'll see no change. You will not lose huge chunks. It
Yeah.
will not die. That's what we mean.
The plant will be fine.
Yeah.
You're not going to kill it like you would like a maidenhair fern. You forget to mist it, and it just sheds all of its
Yeah.
leaves and is dead. And sure, you could revive the roots, but why would you bother trying to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is important. Basically, like we were talking about, like the tolerance of neglect. It's also helpful though to know if a plant likes one particular thing. Like if a plant wants to dry consistently between waterings, or if it needs to stay consistently moist. You can kind of use that as a metric. Like if a plant doesn't mind sitting in standing water, like a Guyana chestnut, peace lilies are even like this. You can basically just like leave them in a puddle of water, knowing that if you're a forgetful waterer, that this will be a way that you can help make this plant more resilient against your neglect. Similarly, if you are a forgetful waterer and you're going to kill the plants through that kind of neglect, find something that, like we mentioned, like snake plants, ZZ plants, a lot of succulents. But basically, most of the plants that we are looking at, though, have the preference of drying slightly between regular watering. So I think that that's another thing that's important to highlight. Like, the things that we agreed on that made a plant tolerant of neglect, that's like the main baseline, I think, is that you need to have the watering consistency there. Even if it is a plant that tolerates drier things.
Yeah, that always helps.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you're gonna have much better luck with more of these plants if that's.
But
part of your
I'm going to
practice.
say too that for many of these, yes, consistency will always help. When I had this Dracaena for years that I keep talking about, like, I would not water it regularly, right?
Well, and it's totally fine.
Yeah, so I do think that we don't want to scare you away either.
Yeah.
To be like, oh yeah, all these things being equal, you must water weekly, and if you don't, none of this applies. It's not.
Yeah,
like
no, because like sure, it probably had like some like growth potential that it wasn't actualizing in that period.
that. Exactly.
But
yeah.
it doesn't stop it from being a perfectly great plant. So I think it's just kind of like knowing how to balance those two things and knowing that like this isn't ideal, but the plant will tolerate it. But one thing that I think really became a disqualifier for a lot of the plants being included in this is a need for humidity. Having or needing
Yeah,
like high atmospheric moisture indoors.
I think that is such a big ask.
Yeah.
Okay? And I grow like some like tropical pitchers and stuff. And
Yeah.
like orchids and
Now, obviously, some parts of the country have like scorching humidity all summer,
That's
which is
true, yeah,
great and
yeah,
easy for
yeah.
them. But many other areas, like the West Coast, we have really dry summers. So the Seattle summer, the humidity is so low that we're going to have difficulty with some things that are classically like really great heat-loving plants. But if it's from a tropical jungle, we're going to have to augment that humidity more. Some plants that really need an arid climate are going to suffer here because they have too much humidity in the winter and it causes rot. So if a plant needed a specific humidity condition, or if like it wasn't going to look good when it was growing in lower humidity, even if it could tolerate it, I basically decided that we just could not do this. Humidity varies dramatically by the season for most growers, and like to be an ideal plant indoors, the plant needs to be tolerant of a wide range of humidity and should thrive without you having to monitor and influence it, because that's one of the harder things to do in a home.
Yeah.
And of course, there are ways to do this easily, but if a plant is going to perish the minute that you get low humidity in indoor spaces, when you turn on your heater
Yeah.
in the winter, like I cannot in good faith recommend it to
Exactly.
a new
Like,
gardener.
there's no such thing as this easy houseplant list as long as you have a humidifier. Like, that's not a
That's not
footnote.
realistic.
It's
You will
just,
forget to refill the humidifier and then it'll die.
and yeah, that's just not something that everybody wants, like, in their micro apartment to have next to their easiest plant. Like,
Yeah.
no way.
So I put the general category ferns, and especially like the Boston fern, and also the Rex begonia in my not recommended list, because without having high humidity, they will drop leaves and dry out. Even when the soil is kept moist, they are far more sensitive to low and fluctuating humidity, compared with most plants. But the ones that appreciate the humidity but aren't like really diva about it include the alocasia and many other types of begonias besides the Rex one. The calathea, many of the ficus, air plants, bromeliads. Basically, like these foliage plants, specifically like having humidity, and because they have kind of a jungle appearance to them, that should make sense. The plants that ideally want low humidity are more of like the desert looking plants, and they might have a tendency to rot when you grow them in a really humid, moist place, especially if it's cool, which can be a lot of our windowsills up here in Seattle in the winter. So it's not good to mix like your alocasia with your ZZ plant, because they just want different ambient humidity. So set yourself up for success if you are growing plants that are picky about that, and make sure that the place that they're in isn't going to potentially give them reason to rot or for their leaves to brown and dry up.
Okay, yeah, and that makes sense. Gosh, okay, so I would say I'm trying to think of my own experience in my own house. I do have corners a little bit. Like I have orchids in one area, and they're not, even orchids from the same parts of the world, but it's ones that I just know they want a little bit more humidity than that Dracaena that I keep talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
But the orchid
yeah.
corner is also successful because it's orchids that like the same conditions. They're grouped together closely. They're also over like open vessels of water or like moistened moss or gravel or stuff to offer
Yeah.
ambient humidity. So that corner space doesn't get the airflow that's gonna like
Yeah.
knock the humid microclimate out. Yeah, it's just a thoughtful way of grouping them because these are less flexible when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I think if you're trying to feel this out in your own home, right? I would not worry to the extent that you're like, oh, if I put this bromeliad right next to this, something that needs more humidity plant, like I would not expect those to instantly, suffer, right?
Yeah,
It's
no,
something where you try
they'll
it,
be
right? You're like,
fine.
oh, hey, like, is this looking, droopier or something, right?
Yeah.
And then you can play with it.
But if you've got like a cactus tucked in among plants that you have to like mist 4 times a day and you have them on
Yeah.
gravel trays, you're not setting your cactus up for
Yeah.
success.
Okay. So, what sources, Matthew, do you think were the best?
So I intentionally used 10 sources that were at the top of my search results because those are the ones that you, listeners, are most likely to see, to share, to read if you're just looking for this stuff on like a Pinterest type site. And because they came from 10 different places that you could find outside of Pinterest, it also kind of just represented the sorts of articles that are available. So among these, one was from the UK, one was from Australia, the rest were from the United States. 3 of them were from magazine publications, several were from people's personal blogs of the lifestyle genre, and the last one was from realtor.com, which was kind of talking about decor and like interior design.
Okay, we did not receive any money from Realtor.com.
That's true. So we'll
mention
black out their
this.
name.
Okay.
We don't want to mention them without
Full disclosure.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty varied, and it offered a variety of expertise, which, based on kind of a combination of personal experience and research, and I personally found that the source was not necessarily a strong indicator of the quality of data, which I wasn't expecting. The thing that I found the most annoying was the prevalence of just these like really vague and super useless details about a plant, and this showed up in several sources for several plants, and these were statements like adaptable and hardy and tough and low light and forgives you if you forget to water. And like, just like we said, these ideas of like thrives on neglect, an easy houseplant, vigorous and easy, an ideal houseplant, like that's not real information. Those are all things that I found written about these plants, but it gives you no information about how to be successful. And if it's not accompanied by something more specific, like how do you know what you're doing? And if you're familiar with plants, you might be able to fill the gaps in a bit. But for the most part, just mentioning one aspect, one care detail, or like a vague endorsement like doesn't cut it.
And I think it's important to point out, like, I know we're sort of maybe speaking to someone who is less experienced with houseplants, right? Like when we're describing this stuff. But really, as more experienced people, I just want to make it clear, we read this and we are also confused, right?
Right, like that's why I'm complaining
vigorous
about
and
it.
easy houseplant. No, it's not something that's going to click after a year or two. No, like I go here and I'm like, I have to look this up somewhere else. I look it up somewhere else. I want to know specifics, like, you know, that like
anyone that says like this is an ideal houseplant, I'm like, but don't you know that people live in so many different ways? Like an ideal houseplant is one that just loves to live in the climate that you watch television in.
Yeah, which is varied around the world.
Yeah, like
it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, basically like it doesn't give you the full picture. So sure, it's an easy houseplant, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be successful with a dwarf banana trees indoor just because somebody said it was easy. And this was a plant that was mentioned, but they didn't say that it needs constant water and it can't dry out and it needs extremely bright to full sunlight. And they talked about how you could grow your own bananas indoors. And I'm like,
my gosh,
you are not giving anything useful. This will not happen for most people.
Sounds very cruel unless I
like,
don't know something about bananas.
Whoever from like Better Homes and Gardens, she just like hated the world that day.
Her internship is over now, I'm sure. And
she's like, grow bananas.
She's not even in.
Put on your flaxseed yogurt fishes
anymore. Okay, so what did you actually find useful then?
Okay, what I found useful was when a source mentioned both the ideal conditions and also the tolerated conditions, because that gave you the most information. So generally, a lot of the plants were touted as being able to thrive in dark corners and unlit rooms, and they can tolerate those conditions. But if you read that a plant can tolerate dark and dry, that's great, but it would be more helpful if you knew that it preferred and will flourish with bright and direct light and constant moisture. So just like your Dracaena, sure, it survived when you put it at the back of your coat closet and never watered it. But it loves it now that you have it in a spot that's much more, brightly lit and you water it consistently. So it's actually able to thrive. It's better to know what a plant wants rather than what it tolerates.
That's a great point. I think for me too, often when I'm looking, I will look at a website that has that will talk about different plants, and I'll kind of compare it to something that I know.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, okay, if I'm researching a succulent maybe, and I'm wondering, all right, well, is this one that likes super arid conditions? I mean, is this one that's going to tolerate a ton of sun, or many of them tolerate a lot, right? But is it going to be like baked or not? Does it want that? Is it a winter grower? Am I going to turn down the light if I want some growth?
Like
for those
sunlight for shorter hours.
Yeah, for those, I try to find websites that have a couple different entries, right? At least one that I know. I'll look at what they say about a plant that I know, and I'll be like, oh, so this is maybe what they mean by dry conditions, right? Or, a soil that's well draining. Maybe they mean super well draining, right? Versus another site. So if there's a plant that you do know, if you have one little foothold, maybe you can have something to help kind of flesh out what they mean by their different terms.
That's actually a really good way of validating their their recommendations.
And I guess we touched on this before a little bit, but what was less than useful in these, or what was kind of meaningless?
Well, like I said, it was imprecise terms like adequately water or give it adequate light or not too much water. Like, these are really relative and they don't give a grower any idea of what the plant really wants. So adequate light for a succulent obviously isn't the same as adequate light for a pothos, and adequate water is not the same for snake plant calathea. So you need more details, like what it actually wants. It's important to know that the range that a plant can tolerate, and like that way you know like how much leeway you have with a plant. A lot of the expressive plants kind of give you that wide margin where like they'll like my spider plant, it actually does something weird. Before it droops, the leaves, which are normally like a kind of crisp solid green, it's not the variegated one, it's more solid color, they actually go pale. Like, it goes from being, like, apple green to, like, pale jade.
Yeah.
And it's really weird. And then I just know, like, when the plant looks pale, I water it, and then, like, the chlorophyll activates or whatever.
Yeah.
I've not looked into what that is, but know the tells that your plant gives you.
Yeah, I have heard this too for a mother of thousands plant that I have, that like the leaves will have speckles, and I think it's true. And I
like
kind
purple blotches.
Yeah, I kind of think the blotches are pretty actually, because they're sort of like geometrical,
So
like symmetrical
keeps it in
there.
kind of
I mean,
a
yeah, it's
deprived
keep
state.
it, keep it thirsty, which is sort of a motto for life. Okay, right?
Yeah, you heard it from Stephen.
Yeah, keep
never
them,
give
keep
all
them
of what
thirsty.
someone wants.
That's right. Okay, so for some of these, we did get long-winded, vague cultural instructions like how to take care of it. All right, so were there any that you found terrible instructions for, like outright misleading instructions? Even
Okay,
if they were
so
vague?
here's where I'm going to like come for English ivy. I have receipts. I don't like it as a houseplant. But it was this like bizarre standout when it came to the frequency of mention, and yet with really vague and completely unspecific cultural requirements. Good Housekeeping mentioned it but didn't offer a single hint for how to keep it alive, and another source mentioned that it preferred to have like medium to bright lighting, and another source mentioned that it liked to be kept cool, which is kind of a direct signal that it's an outdoor plant if it wants to be kept cool.
Yeah.
But like, there just were no sources that actually told you anything useful about it. And
which, I mean, is fine by me, okay?
Yeah.
I don't want more English ivy in the world. It's like, is it considered an invasive species here in the Northwest?
Yeah,
I feel
absolutely.
like it is. It's just everywhere. We have this, you can, like, cities kind of have rat problems. I think that's a big, those are like big rat habitats, I'm pretty sure, right? Ivy.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So anyway, it's everywhere, and I am really sick of it. And maybe you love it. Like I think it's great, like on a brick building in England.
Yeah, like I think it's beautiful in that stance. Like that is where it belongs.
Maybe at colleges. Yeah.
Yeah. But even then, I think that there are better plants.
Okay.
However, so the thing with English ivy indoors is that it is an outdoor plant. It likes to stay cooler. It likes pretty bright light. It doesn't drape and vine the way that a pothos does. It likes to grow its roots into things. So you can actually cause substantial damage if you just leave a plant somewhere without really like caring for it, and it starts growing its little roots into like the tracks of windows and things.
Yeah, I think you'd have to really love the look of English ivy. Like,
And I think it's too precious. Like, it's too temperate, it's too British, it's too cottage garden. I don't want that indoors.
yeah, it has a very outdoor feel to me. Yeah, I just don't
Now, this is entirely opinion at this
totally.
point. Yeah.
But yeah, I would think that it's not very easy, and I didn't even read these instructions. But I'm kind of like you're saying, like it's rigid, kind of like you're not just gonna take the vine and flop it somewhere
And
else.
it also
Like
smells
you just
kind of weird.
does it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're probably smelling
it's
rats. You're smelling the rats.
No, like I'm talking about my grandparents' backyard. When I was a child, they had English ivy that was like growing out of the forest on both sides because it had come from their neighbors. Because in the 50s, when that development was made, they just put a ton of ivy down as like a ground cover in the forest.
Well, after this episode, I'm going to gently tell Matthew that his grandparents probably had rats in their yard.
I know that they did, and they were cute. because I love woodland
I didn't
animals.
expect it to go that way. Okay.
Yeah, I actually met a little mouse on my walk home from something the other night.
I like them. I like them. I like them. Okay. I just don't like them everywhere. I don't like them.
I think that
route to jump out of a bush.
we are why they are here, so we can't get mad at them. Okay, but we're getting really far off topic at this point. I do, though, want to mention that there is a plant that has absolutely no genetic connection to ivy, but it looks just like it, and it's called wax ivy. And Stephen can look it up right now.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
I can't remember the scientific name, but that is a wild plant. It's variegated, and it looks exactly like English ivy, variegated English ivy, except that it is this weird, like, fleshy succulent.
It's Senecio macroglossus.
Yeah, and it has little daisy flowers. This plant is like totally wild.
Way more appealing.
Yeah, it's actually really beautiful.
It's somewhat similar, I think.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a better designed, like, Japanese cartoon version of ivy.
Yeah, that one's nice. Okay, so you said earlier that hens and chicks you thought of as an outdoor plant.
Oh, yeah. So the reason for this is that there are lots of succulents that look like hens and chicks. They're specifically, like, they were actually, like, specifically talking about, like, the Sempervians. Is that
I don't know the genus name. I know what you're talking about, though, because the hens and chicks are typically sort of a much tighter, like,
it's a
cabbagey
rosette.
looking.
Yeah, and they grow like little baby plantlets around the outside. That's why they're called hens and chicks. They thrive in this particular climate that we're in right now. Like, you will see rockeries just like spilling with them. I planted a ton of them in my mom's front rock garden, and I just actually gave you some cuttings of them recently.
Yeah, for my mom's rock garden.
Yeah, we're just spreading the world with rock garden succulents.
So for you, those are indoor plants.
Nope,
right?
they are not indoor plants.
Oh, sorry, outdoor plants.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for you, they're outdoor, and that, I sort of grudgingly agree.
They would do okay indoors, except that they need really good direct sunlight, and they will do that thing where they grow tall. And this is my favorite thing, to laugh at people in a not kind way when someone's like, "Yeah, my succulent's growing," and I'm like, "Bitch, it's exfoliating. That thing about to rot and die.
It's starving. Like, it's looking desperately for light."
Yeah,
right?
like that poor little plant wants to be like a tight collection of little beans.
That's true.
Now that it's 5 feet tall.
And so hens and chicks, my family kind of has like grown them indoors for a while. And this is like,
do they survive year after year?
So the thing is, I don't think they're truly hens and chicks. That's what I'm thinking now.
Okay.
It's one of these things that I've just heard mentioned for a while. Then my mom got one recently again. She's like, "Oh, here, I'm going to grow this in the thing that Grandma and Grandpa used to grow them. We put hens and chicks in it." And I'm kind of like, I think that's like a Echevarria.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I was kind of like, but I was like, okay, yeah, cool. I didn't know where she got that plant. I'm not going to tell her, like, Grandma's wrong. At least not right now. I'm sure I will, like, later. But
there's a bunch of those genuses that, the names of which I can't remember right now.
Oh, no, there's a ton that are, like, little rosetted looking
Some of them are really
succulents.
great indoors. But the Sempervians is really great outdoors.
Okay, so yeah, we can clarify. What he means is that specific one, so like really the correct maybe hens and chicks designation, right? That's what Matthew means.
Well, and another plant that showed up, I think maybe once or twice on the lists, was the creeping wire vine, which also is like a great outdoor plant. I have several of them growing on my balcony, where they're kind of providing like this woodland ambiance, and they're like draping over the railing and stuff. So like, it's really beautiful, but they like the sunlight outdoors. They like the cool nights outdoors.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and people grow them in rockeries outdoors here all the time. That's another plant on my mom's garden. But that's another one that indoors, I just don't think you'd be very successful. I think
I agree. I think they always look kind of sickly indoors.
Yeah.
And then here, at least in Seattle, they look so amazing outdoors. Yeah, draping over things. So
but I think they're only hardy to like a little colder than here. So
really? Okay.
You might have to grow them at least as a protected like porch plant.
Okay. So the plants mentioned. All right. So I guess this is plant frequency, basically, like frequency of mentions. So was it that the most, the best plants were mentioned the most for you? Or in your reading here, or not? Or were they generally right? I guess this is like the hive mind of clickbait people.
I would say not really. Okay. Like, I was actually a little bit surprised that this wasn't a consistency. So, of course, like, like I already said, the top 17 were already great choices, but there were also plenty of plants that were only mentioned once or twice that I would strongly recommend. And some of these were plants that I would actually even recommend more than some of the ones that were more consistent. So those include like the cast iron plant, Dracaena, some Euphorbia species, bird's nest ferns. All of these are surprisingly hardy. There's also parlor palms, Hoyas, Guiana chestnut, which you might know as like Chinese money plant, peperomia, staghorn fern. There's a lot of philodendrons. Like these were all good plants that I was surprised not to see more often.
Oh, okay. So you would recommend staghorn fern, really?
Yeah, I've actually had really fantastic luck with them, and I'm growing
Huh.
most of them mounted and like growing in interesting planters. Like I have one in a pumice planter that I've used like a really
Yeah.
coarse mix. Like that thing is getting huge and it's growing so many shield fronds
And
and
that's a
like fertile
pretty, I
fronds.
feel like that's a pretty low light spot.
It is under
Or where is it
three
now?
17 watt.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I'm thinking maybe like three positions ago in your house when it was on your TV table. Was that the
Yeah,
same one?
that was pretty low light, and it's
Okay.
much better now because I had it under the
Okay.
orchid
So it's
lights, and then
not
I
for
also
everything.
had it under the dining room lights.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but I would include those.
Okay. So, other than English ivy, was there anything that was like appalling to see on these lists?
Yeah, Rex begonias. Like,
Yeah.
so there are lots of different types of begonias, and they're grouped by the way that their roots are. So there are the
Yeah.
rhizomaceous begonias that grow from a rhizome that creeps on the surface, roots sprout from there, and then the leaves are carried on petioles. Um, these are mostly grown for their foliage. There's not many of them that are really prized for the flowers. And there is this specific subset of the rhizomaceous begonias called Rex begonias. They're gorgeous. They often have like really painted looking
It's kind of
leaves.
like a paisley look or something almost,
Yeah,
like the design, right?
because the leaves are like rippled and they'll kind of curl, and so some of them almost look like snail shells with like a whorl,
Yeah.
a petal that kind of comes together. Some of them just kind of have that natural like kind of paisley swirl shape, and then with just that really elaborate
Yeah.
multicolored, like some of them are truly
Like they're
fantastic.
really pretty. I
Yeah.
just think they're not beginner. Like I have an experience with this one too. I got one I think through Matthew or through Miles or something.
Yeah.
And I gave it to my mom and really set it up really well for her. And she's a fairly experienced person with, I mean, she's more of an outdoor plant person, but indoor, plants as well. I
And
have
she does
this,
well with orchids.
yeah, and I have her, I just got to set her up well, put it in a place that, I thought was good light wise and everything. And really, it's kind of just staying the same. Like it will grow, it will kind of lose a leaf. I
Yeah.
feel like it's one that,
And I
we
think
would
this was
have
Red
to,
Robin, which
yeah.
is like black and red.
Yeah,
They're
it's
amazing
really cool
foliage.
looking. But yeah, I feel like something's missing in our, it's just not a basic plant. Like maybe we need to
Yeah.
give it a season or maybe we need to,
Well, so here's the problem with them. They have dormancy periods where they either stop or slow ground growing, and sometimes they'll lose all their
Oh,
leaves,
okay.
and they don't want to be watered much, but they'll dry out because the rhizome doesn't store that much water. So like that's kind of a bitchy
Huh.
aspect. But they also are really picky about their watering schedule. They want high humidity, but that makes them susceptible to mildews. They want brighter light than you usually see them listed because typically it's like these are low
Yeah.
light plants. Yeah, but they really want pretty bright light to keep the patterning looking sharp and also to encourage the new growth. And if they're growing rapidly, then they're less likely to get the powder mildew. You want the air movement to be good enough that the humidity doesn't just sit on it, and then the spores can make it a bad problem. But
Yeah.
you also need it to dry slightly between waterings because being too wet encourages this mildew too. So this is a plant that you want to see wilt a little bit, but you can't let it wilt a lot or it won't really come back and it will drop leaves. So yeah, basically, and another that's available at really low prices that is going to be found at a lot of different sources. This kind of goes against my general rule of thumb that the price corresponds to the ease of growing for a plant. Like, I know that we kind of touched on this, but a lot of times, like, if you find a plant that's available for like $6 in a 4-inch pot, that probably means that it was easy to propagate and fast to grow, and it's pretty dependable, and it's not that rare. So if you find one that is very expensive, you might question whether or not it's as easy. So Going against that rule is the Erasia palm. And there's also the Majesty palm all included in this. They're really easy to grow in greenhouses in Florida, which is basically where they're all produced to distribute. And I looked on Dave's Garden, which is another online publication that I use as a reference. And
Same, yeah.
yeah, and they say that these two are like not ideal indoor palm trees. I have had both of them myself and I've killed them along with um, the Majesty palm that I was talking about. Dave's Garden gave me some idea on why they like a really high light intensity and they like lots of water. So they do fine if you keep them outdoors most of the year and then bring them inside for the colder season. But they also kind of want higher humidity than we usually have indoors, and they're really susceptible to spider mites and a lot of other indoor pests.
Yeah, so I had one of these too. I got it at the same time as the Dracaena
Oh
actually.
yeah, that makes
And
sense.
I had it for a while, but it did have pests all the time, I felt like. And
Yeah,
it had a big die off. I thought it was going to die forever.
yeah. This is a plant that falls into the category of plants that look great for a long time once they've already decided to die. um, like a lot of plants, like
Yeah.
bromeliads, they'll look gorgeous as they rot from within. Some plants decline hideously, and you throw them out well before it's like salvageable. But this
Yeah.
is yeah, these palm trees are not great. So I don't think that they are great. I think that the only indoor palms that I really recommend are the parlor palm. And then when we talk about the plants that we actually recommend for this in next week and how to care for some of them, I'll talk about like the parlor palm, but also the other palm species that I think are really great if you're looking for that particular look. I think there's kind of a lot to talk about with palm trees in particular.
Okay, so we have your gold standard source that you put together, Matthew. Thank you. So this list, but if we were to look elsewhere, or if you're just looking online, like what is a quality source for this kind of information? Like should we look at gardeners' blogs? Should we look at certain nurseries, or should we just look at like HomeDepot.com? I mean, is that going to tell us like where would you go, or how would you feel like you
So
knew a good source or not?
I mean, one answer is you just read a lot of things and then kind of compare it all. But I think if you don't want to do that, which not everybody does, it's important to keep in mind like that the cultural guidelines are going to vary. So between what's tolerated and what's ideal for a plant, you can come across like seemingly conflicted information, and this is partially because of this regionality. So a plant grown in full sun in the northern areas
Yeah.
might burn easily in southern areas. So the source from Arizona saying that a plant needs to be protected from sun and given ample water when growing, if you grow that plant in Florida, you might consider it drought hardy, but in Seattle, we would want to give it the brightest light that we can. So, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like consider the source a bit if you're reading something that
Yeah.
seems different. Like,
Exactly. Like the Florida Botanical Society or something
yeah,
is not going to help as much for someone living in Fairbanks,
and
right?
if you're reading
Yeah.
something that's published in Melbourne, which I read several of without really realizing it, because there's like a lot of plant people in Australia,
And that's warmer and more humid?
and their summer is our winter. Like,
Okay.
so when they're talking about the seasonality of things,
So if they just say July, it means something different.
yeah, and they also have a climate that's quite like San Francisco. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, like it's interesting. Um, but it's also kind of good to know like the little things that tell you if an article was written by somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, like using the correct Latin names, like instead of just the common ones or like trade names. So if someone's only talking about like their fiddle leaf or their monstera, but they don't use like Adamsonii or like something to kind of give you some cue that it's researched a little bit. I know that this sounds terribly vague, but you can definitely tell if somebody just uses like a really broad term for something.
Yeah, I think it's, if you're like, is this person a plant person?
Yeah.
Right?
And like sometimes it's not useful because like a common name might vary by region to region, by supplier. They can also apply to many different plants that aren't like close in their care requirements. So when they're being really specific with those terms, both like using generalized terms like ferns and succulents. Like there's a lot of types of both of these, and you can't just care for like any plant that is called a fern the same way. So I think that talking about them all like they're equal tells you that this is not somebody who's like got their best information.
Yeah. So,
Well, can I tell you something that
yeah.
was like really frustrating was when they would use a photograph of the wrong plant. Like,
Oh,
like this might be something that you have to kind of know plants to be able to tell this, but one of the ways that I could just kind of immediately tell that they didn't know what they were talking about was when they use a photo of a monstera or an anthurium when they're talking about philodendrons, which just kind of told me immediately that
that's
the list
pretty
was
different to me.
yeah, like
Because I think there's kind of this like philodendron and pothos thing a little bit for me at least. But I mean, Monstera?
yeah, and if you're talking about like philodendrons, about how there's all these different kinds, then you use a picture of an anthurium. Like I just question, like, do you know what that is? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and they don't grow the same. They grow similarly, but like it's not identical. So I think that that just tells you what you need to know about that person. Basically, I think that there is a whole bunch of article content that is basically just generated by people who are reading similar articles, which means that we might just be like getting the Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, and
Yeah.
it wasn't the wrong source to begin
You
with.
know, and also if if English Ivy is anywhere on the site is recommended, then you know to just instantly just
Yeah.
close browser, like all tabs.
Well, so I would say like the TLDR version. Um, do you want to know like some of the plants that I would recommend for different like styles?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is
Different
gonna get
styles. Wait, what do you mean by that?
well, like if you're going for like hashtag jungle vibes,
Oh yeah.
like
Sure.
okay, Ficus elastica, Chinese evergreen, spider plant, bird's nest fern, heart's leaf philodendron, and parlor palms.
And this would be the jungle
Yeah,
ones.
like these are all great plants that are easy to grow. The Ficus elastica is a great indoor ficus. You have a few really great foliage plants there that are easy to care for. There is some drama. There are some plants there that like to be kept pretty moist. A couple that are pretty okay if you're forgetful. Like that's a great place to start if you like those looks.
And you have a fern in here.
I do.
Is that a true fern?
Yeah, so the bird's nest fern, I know this kind of goes against some of the other things that I was talking about. Steven's looking up the scientific name right now because I can't remember it. But it is a type of fern from tropical Southeast Asia and kind of northern Australia. And it grows as an epiphyte. And it kind of has a similar appearance to a bromeliad. It kind of behaves like a bromeliad in the like Indo-Pacific because it'll collect things at the base when it's growing. What's the scientific name there, Steven?
So it's Asplenium nidus.
Okay, yeah. So that is a fern that I've started growing indoors. And what I like about it is that it is pretty okay with low humidity. Like it's not suffering too much indoors. Some of its leaves are looking a little bit brown because like we're in the driest period of our year right now. But it's putting out a lot of good new growth and it does it pretty dependably. And all I have to do is just water it when the surface looks dry. And I've had this plant for a few months and I'm pretty pleased with it. And I kind of tend to agree with what people said about it, which was similar in a lot of the sources that I read.
Okay, so what about desert vibes? Or the desert corner?
Yeah, so this is great for lower humidity but really bright light. I think that you are really going to succeed if you do like an indoor yucca plant. There's a particular one that you'll find at any like box garden store. They're pretty inexpensive and they kind of look like a Dracaena. They kind of look spiky. The one thing that they like is pretty high air movement or they might get some powder mildew. And actually one of our listeners who actually I think you know too, Mike in Chicago, yeah, he has a yucca that was getting some powder mildew and asked us on Facebook what it was and how he should treat it. So thanks, Mike, for the question. That's a great plant for jungle vibes, or sorry, for like kind of a desert look indoors, but you don't want it to be stagnant and you want the light to be bright enough that it doesn't get that. It's pretty susceptible. But the other plants that I'll include are aloes. There's a bunch of different types of aloes. Jade plant, crown of thorns, euphorbia, burrow's tail, which is a type of sedum. These are all really great low maintenance plants that don't mind if you water them kind of generously when they're actually growing, but they also won't mind if you maybe want to water them twice over the winter.
Okay, what about indoor flowers?
The easiest, I think, are just going to be like peace lilies, goldfish plant, phalaenopsis. Like these are all plants that tolerate pretty low light. They like to be a little bit on the wetter side compared to a lot of these, and if you fertilize them and give them bright enough light, you can usually depend on them having flowers at least a couple of times a year, which is always kind of a treat.
Okay, so what about the truly, quote unquote, black thumb resistant people who cannot grow plants or they think they can't? Where should they go?
So this is kind of like the level of plants that I would start the most plant illiterate people at. Snake plant, Sansevieras,
Yeah.
the ZZ plant, Zamiococcus
Yes.
zamifolia, pothos, aka devil's ivy, epipremnum, cast iron plant, and then Guiana chestnut. And the Guiana chestnut you will sometimes see called like Chinese luck plant or like Chinese money plant. It's usually braided. It has like kind of a swollen caudex
Yeah.
type trunk. You braid them together, and then the top has like these like palmate leaves. They're really pretty. They're really easy to grow. They like a wide range of light, and they grow quickly. And they don't mind actually sitting in water. They grow in swamps in the wild. So that's a really fantastic plant that is very tolerant of a lot of different conditions. Snake plant and ZZ and cast iron, they are all totally fine if you give them anything from like bright light all the way down to like low light.
Yes.
They'll grow slowly in those conditions. They'll grow better with more. They're also pretty fine if you forget to water them most of the time. They may begin to look a little sad eventually, but as long as your light is high enough, which is like pretty lit or like dimly lit,
Yeah.
you'll be good with that. And then pothos is like the vining plant that grows in everyone's office. Like if a plant had a name, it would be Phyllis. And this is Epipremnum aurea. And
Yeah, I think of this as in every church community center, in every dorm room
yeah,
sort of plant.
it's like just a very dependable plant that you see everywhere. And I kind of overlooked it for years because if the dentist is growing it, do I really want to?
I'm currently still overlooking it, but go on.
Yeah, but if you want high impact, there are several different versions of this vine that have been kind of genetically created with like all kinds of whack science techniques. And so there's a few different looks of variegation. There's some with more, there's some with less. They are pretty undemanding about their light. They are really undemanding about the amount of water. They pretty much thrive in an area that nothing else will. There's also some similarly related species that I think are great, like Cebu Blue. This is kind of a newer
I
plant.
think I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is one that's hashtag trending, and I am doing some propagation of it right now. I posted a picture on Instagram, but that's a related species that's also really easy. And I think that these are some exciting plants that are going to give really good results for people who don't know what they're doing and want to just give it a try.
Okay, so we've talked through these basics, like basic dry, basic jungly. What if you're like, these basics, okay, you have these. What if you're like ready for step 2? What would you add?
So if you're feeling like you passed the 101 level class, I think that you should get yourself a fiddle leaf fig, a calathea, or a prayer plant. And the prayer plant is very closely related to the calathea.
They're everywhere right now.
They are
right?
so popular, and I feel like this just kind of like went off a little while ago. I have grown a few before, and they're actually kind of the plants that got me into variegation, because for a long time I just do not like the kind of plain, simple, like yellow on green variegation that you see in a lot of like temperate landscaping plants, and like the pothos we were just talking about. That's not my favorite look, and I really hate when it's like on a ficus or something. I think it just makes a plant look so precious, but it's really popular right now. And so I'm starting to kind of come around as I see different kinds of variegation on plants. And then I wouldn't even call Calathea variegated necessarily because it's not that same kind of mechanism. They're just really elaborately patterned
So why are these a little bit next level?
because they like more humidity. And they're a plant that likes to stay pretty consistently moist, but they'll rot if you keep them wet. So, like, the two things to care about beyond like what you would most plants, keep the watering consistent, keep their humidity a little higher to make their leaves look good, and give them bright light that's not actually going to like burn the leaves. They're pretty delicate, but you'll get the best color with pretty bright light.
Okay, yeah, and this makes sense to me. I think, if you know not to put this next to, the place on the window where your cactus is doing incredibly well, or
Yeah,
something.
you'll come home
or,
and all the leaves will be like pale gray, dead, crisp.
Yeah, or if oh, now I know how to read the signs of this, plant that is responsive, or whatever
Yeah.
you said, like this Dracaena, like, oh, it's going to sag a little bit if it's thirsty.
And a Calathea will do that.
Yeah, if you know how to read these signs and stuff now, so these are good next steps.
It's also good to know like how much leeway you have. So a Calathea, they'll wilt. You should water them pretty quickly when you see that. Like
Okay,
prayer
yeah.
plants, they're actually closely related, and you'll kind of see them all called like prayer plants collectively, or like peacock plants. Those are other names for them. And the fiddle leaf fig, the only reason that I put that on this list is like next level. They're a little bit tougher because they like to just grow one shoot that just goes up tall. So you have to prune it pretty regularly to try to encourage lateral growth so that it becomes
yeah.
bushy. They also kind of look a little bit marled as they grow older because
Yeah.
those big leaves damage easily and develop spots. So maybe that's not your aesthetic. They also will drop leaves if you're kind of lax on your watering schedule. So there's a little bit of challenge associated there that I don't think that it's going to be a big deal, but like maybe figure out how to keep like a Diffenbachia happy first.
Okay, so is there anything that did not come up at all that you would include?
So the lady palm, which is Rhapis excelsa, is a really fantastic indoor palm. It kind of has like umbrella shaped leaves. It likes lower light, and it does pretty well if you keep it fairly moist. That's a really dependable one that I've had for years and I'm really happy with.
Yeah, that's the thing. These I think are pretty accessible. Like you can find these. I'm
They're
surprised.
fairly expensive because
really?
they're
Okay.
slow growing, but if you're looking to kind of splurge yourself, get like the biggest size lady palm that you can afford and pot it nicely in a pot that's like slightly larger with a good like rich well draining soil, and put it in an area that is protected from like the hottest brightest direct sunlight, and keep it fairly moist, and it'll be a really gorgeous house plant for years. It'll grow eventually. Mine now has lots of little babies coming in around the base, so it's becoming really full.
Okay.
I've also talked on previous episodes about Ficus maclelandi. It's called the banana leaf fig, but I think that one's really resistant to dropping leaves like a lot of other ficus, and it has kind of a willowy appearance indoors that just has really beautiful architecture, and it does pretty decently with lower light and drier air than a lot of other figs.
Yeah, that's a really nice one.
It's one of my favorites for sure. I'd also put the white bird of paradise, which is kind of becoming popular again on Instagram. It is from the 70s. It is tall. Like each leaf kind of looks like an oar, and they're really kind of like glossy and leathery. I've had those before in a couple different apartments, and they are tolerant of a lot of light. They like the most light that you can give them. They'll even tolerate full sun, but they're a very fast growing plant too. So if you have an area that you want something that gives a lot of impact but doesn't really sprawl horizontally, this is a great plant.
So does this flower easily indoors?
It won't flower indoors.
Okay.
It would be lovely if it did, but I think they need to be significantly larger than you can have in your home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The flowers are also kind of wild looking. Like,
They're really cool.
I'm sure that you know like what the orange bird of paradise looks like. This is a relative of that. I think that is a genus of those two species alone, perhaps. But the orange one, the flowers are held on long stalks. The white one though, they kind of just like tuck out from the leaves, and they're just like these huge gnarled like lobster claw looking things
Yeah.
with these like white and purple like kind of petals that come out. It's an interesting flower that I think you have to see them growing in like
Yeah, they
Hawaii.
kind of look like mistakes to me, but they're really
Yeah.
pretty. They look a little bit smashed, but I mean, it's clearly not a mistake when you look at it. If
Yeah.
that helps at all.
I'm like looking
sure
at
it
this
doesn't.
over Stephen's
Yeah.
shoulder on the Wikipedia. Yeah, so that's a great indoor plant that gives like some really kind of jungly retro vibes. It feels kind of 20s, it feels kind of 70s, it feels very modern as well. And you'll get it to grow pretty quickly if you just give it bright light. And I find that they like a lot of water. So as long as they're not just like sitting in it aquatically, I think you'll be pretty good. And then Pilea peperomoides, it's sort of the plant that everybody needed and now everybody has.
Yeah.
But I think that they're great. I kind of
They're
laugh.
so easy, I think.
Yeah, like some people on Instagram are like, I don't know how to keep this alive. This is my 10th one. I spent over $100 on Pileas and I keep killing them. What am I doing wrong? I'm like,
They have?
what are you doing?
Wow, yeah.
There are like 2 accounts that we follow who have a lot of trouble. And if you're listening, like, reach out to us. Like, I really want to help you be successful. I feel like this is a
Yeah.
plant that you can nail, and I believe in you.
Yeah, my only thought is like, oh, you know, don't necessarily let this dry out, like keep it a little bit more wet. I had a friend lose one when he moved it from behind a television to full sun outdoors on a balcony that really has unobstructed sun. It's this amazing balcony in Seattle.
Oh.
So like he
I'm
had
jealous.
full sun, exactly. Full sun all day. So it was just so extreme that I'm like, I'm not sure what would have survived that. But that's the only cases I've heard of these dying that I know. Anyway.
Yeah,
okay.
well, but I mean, this just goes to show, though, like, you obviously aren't going to have the same success that everybody
Yeah.
will for a plant.
Yeah, okay.
So, things that, like, die easily when they start to, like, diminish, like ferns and begonias, those are not ideal for a first-time grower. I think that you should focus on plants that are going to reward you with their beauty easily.
Plants that want to live.
Yeah, like plants that want to look beautiful.
Do not hold grudges.
Yeah, they need minimal care and they'll grow if you just find the right place for them. So there's a lot to choose from, and why many of the online sources that help give you a good starting point, they're not always dependable and they can't always take into account how you care for your plants, and they're at their most useful when you use them as part of your research, like not taking like any one source in particular like as the gospel truth, because it's going to vary so much for person to person. You need to take into account your own growing space and habits when it comes from caring for your plants. So because it's not necessarily going to be easy for you if it is for other people, you might also find that you have unexpected success with something that other people consider more challenging.
Yeah.
So, like, don't stop yourself if you're interested in trying something and it's not something that you've seen on these easy to grow plant lists.
Yeah, just try it out.
Yeah, there's no reason to not give it a try. Basically, like, if a plant can survive indoors, like, I'm sure that you can figure out how to do something that'll keep it happy at least long enough to try again later if you kill it.
Or if you're just
We've all done
consistent with
that.
your conditions, right?
Yeah.
You know, and they say too, I think it's more often true that you would overwater something than, you know, keep it too dry. And I guess we're going to talk about this more next time, right?
Yeah.
Like what actual tactics? I mean, right now we're kind of just reading the lists, right? Reading and then reading them a little bit.
Yeah, so it all just comes down to finding the plant that, like, wants the conditions that you already have. Do you have anything that you want to add, Stephen?
Gosh, no. I mean, I think it's kind of a good call. I didn't think of that Pilea at the very end, putting that on there.
I
That
think
I
it's
feel
a
like is
great
my,
plant.
yeah, that was sort of one of my starter house plants too, I think, as well.
Yeah, so I made a Pinterest board, like I do, and it includes all of the sources that I use for this episode. If you're curious about the data that I kind of put together,
Yeah, or if you were not taking notes, we have the notes there.
yeah, this is an episode where I'm going to write a summary up of this and put it on our website, our blog, which is just plantdaddypodcast.com. And I'm going to include a list of like the Excel spreadsheet that I put together in case there are any plant nerds out there who want to like take a look and see some of the things that I found. I have no idea if anybody else finds that interesting, but
Yeah, so they can see, what the hive mind thought
I
and
put all
what
that
we
work
thought of
into
that.
it, so I insist somebody looks
Right.
at it.
So please download it 3 times.
Yeah,
okay?
and send it to your friends.
Yes.
Yeah, but next episode we're going to talk about the plants that we would kind of specifically list as indestructible. We're going to talk about some of the best ways to grow them and some areas to kind of get you started out with that quest for an indestructible plant.
Yeah.
So, this has been Plant Daddy Podcast. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It would really be great if we could start kind of being more present on iTunes charts and stuff for people to see us. And I think that gets made more accessible with rates and subscriptions.
Yeah, that will help people find us. And we will also we're trying to seed ourselves around a little bit in different, plant circles, LGBT podcast circles, etc.
Yeah, if you happen to be part of an LGBT podcast or a plant podcast, we love the idea of sharing conversation with experts. So please don't ever be afraid to be in touch. We are here to listen. You can give us an email at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com or check us out on social media, which are basically all just Plant Daddy Podcast. So yeah, we are looking forward to you tuning in next time. Thank you for listening.
Happy growing. Thanks.